Caledonian Elixir. Live from Glasgow, Scotland, and good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is the Caledonian Elixir, and I'm Vincent Lawlor, and we are live on YouTube, Twitter X, and we also upload to Spotify. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button wherever you find us. It helps us in that social media labyrinth that is YouTube, and I do appreciate it. And if I sound a little bit different, that's because my microphone is down. I'm using the camera microphone, and so if I sound a little bit more distant, that's the reason why. So today, as you can see, we've got a knockout panel show for you with some you know and some you don't. An excellent lineup of guests. So we're told that the Anglo-American alliance is the most powerful in history, but I want to address today who really is calling the shots behind the corridors of power, because beyond elected leaders, parliamentarians and prime ministers and presidents, there exists a shadowy network of influential insiders and societies. So from the Council of Foreign Relations, CIA, Chatham House, these organisations also shape our foreign policy. But do these policies really work for the public or those that wield it? So to address this and more is my panel of guests. So joining us from Canada is Matt Ehret. He is a journalist, documentary filmmaker, and founder of the Canadian Patriot. And there is Jim Jatras. He is a former US diplomat and advisor to US Senate Republican leadership. And also joining us for the first time is Nico Lagan. He is a former sales engineer turned independent broadcaster. And lastly is Benjamin Balderson. He is a constitutionalist who is living off the grid and speaks out against government overreach. So everybody can hear me fine?
Yeah.
And Matt, thank God I got your name correct. Last time you were on the show, I called you Matt Ho. Jim, you know who Matt Ho is, so that was
I've seen him,
a bad mistake on my part. So
this Matt, is that a good person or a bad person?
No, he's a good guy. He's a good guy.
Okay,
he's a former Marine Intelligence officer, if I'm correct. And
yes, H-O-H, Ho.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's on like a Napolitano show and some of those other places, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
He was a good guest, like yourself.
Okay.
So in my monologue, I alluded to like the CFR Chatham House, but another obvious example is the Trilateral Commission that was integral in reforming relationships with Deng Xiaoping's China, for example. So, Matt, how are influential institutions such as the CFR, Trilateral Commission, and their British counterparts How do they develop into prominent organisations of global governance that shape our foreign policy making?
That's a good way to start the show. It's not an easy one to answer directly, so I'll try to keep it concise and short to give everyone else a chance to chime in. But I would say through knowing history. I mean, the oligarchy is a parasite that's been latched onto humanity for thousands of years, and they're quite good for all of the things that they're very bad at. They're very good at learning from past mistakes and learning from history to find ways of improving upon their art of infiltration, manipulation, subversion, and making the false appear true. And sure enough, things like the Round Table movement, which seeded things like the CFR in America, worked very closely with another think tank set up around the same time at the end of the 19th century called the Fabian Society, and they would work together, one catering a little bit more to a labor leftist orientation to weaponize the poor, but also run by misanthropic people who hated humanity and wanted to cull the poor, ironically. And the other group focusing a little bit more on sort of the Cecil Rhodes, Lord Milner-oriented groupings ideologically that would cater to incubating young talent in Oxford, the other one in the London School of Economics, and they would work together to penetrate multi-generationally. They would think multi-generationally. And they learned from the techniques of people like, Fabius Maximus, the general of Rome, that developed certain innovations to weaken Hannibal and defeat the Carthaginians in the Second Punic War. So they're learning and extracting from what works in history to apply to more modern day issues. And they think about the deep future in ways that most of their victims, most of the people who are just good people, wanting to live their lives, have a family, they don't tend to think in the deep past and deep future. And thus that's our biggest weakness, is just thinking short-term myopically and falling for the same tricks that are done again and again every few generations. So that's how I'd say it works.
Jim, you've worked inside the political system. How does your experience and observations reflect what has been described here about foreign policy?
I think Matt is right. I mean, I sometimes do wonder whether it's these organizations that run things, or rather it's the people who run things belong to these various organizations. Sometimes you wonder, if you know their names and their faces of organizations, are they really the puppet masters, or some of the puppets of people who are even more obscure than they are? But I think there's no doubt that organizations like this that Matt mentioned, you didn't get it to the CFR and so forth. I think you actually got to the mother lode with the Round Table, the Milner Group, and all that sort of thing. And a lot of this does have to do with a very bizarre kind of relationship between the United States and Great Britain. That I'm not as a good transplanted Southerner here, I'm a big fan of Abraham Lincoln, who was the undertaker of our first Constitution. That having been said, there's no question that up until the time of the Civil War, the British Empire thought they could still break us down and bring us to heel by splitting off the South, creating like a Southern Canada that would squeeze what was left of the Union between it. However, when that failed, they, through Fabian means, accomplished the same end for the whole thing later on in the early 20th century. And there has been, like, for example, people talk about, the Five Eyes, it's the Anglosphere. It's no coincidence that this is strongest in these countries. And there is that special relationship we can talk about. What's weird about it in some ways, though, is even though you might say a common Anglo-Saxon identity is what part of what led to this commonality, we have in all these countries regimes that are actually hostile to the indigenous Anglo-Saxon people in all these countries. I mean, that's why you have the police in Britain siding with migrants against native English people. This hostility to the core demographic that founded all these countries, even though the relationship was established on the basis of what had been a common cultural origin And that's, it's one reason why, the Five Eyes share information with each other that they don't give to even our closest allies. Well, there's the Israelis, of course, but that's a special case. They just steal the 5% they haven't been given with the other 95% they have been given. So, but I think Matt is on the right track here. That these are, let's say, the tip of the iceberg of some very influential hidden hands that play a big role in American policy. And of course, America is the unipolar power emerging from the Cold War, has a great deal of influence left in the world, although we're going to see how that will unfold in the next few years. I think we're losing that for good, I think.
Nico, welcome to the show, man. And I think this is an apt question for you. As you're Canadian, yet the head of state of Canada is the British Crown. So, keeping with the theme of my question, how do you feel about where we are with the influence of secret societies, the British Crown, and how it affects, Canada too?
It's hard to follow them all. That's the problem, because it was just mentioned. How do you know who plays for which team? You have no idea. And this is what you're seeing here. But as mentioned, you see the results. You see it all over the West. You see the results. And we're seeing it. Matt can attest to this. You look at this in Canada, mass immigration over the past 5 years is literally replacing the commoners, like the people like me, Christians, white European Christians that build this country. Mm-hmm. And this is something that's going on throughout the West. So as much as there's secret societies all over the place, you look at the WHO, we have our prime minister was on the board of trustee of the WHO while the WEF 2050 net zero agenda was drafted and presented to their members. This is who the prime minister of Canada is right now in Canada. So that tells you which club is he part of? I don't know. Is the WEF ruled by secret society? I don't know. I really don't know. It's so hard to keep track of everything that's going. I'm not an historian like Matt is, but what I am is somebody that reads legislation. I'm someone that will read bills, and all those bills sound the same no matter where you're looking. I don't care that you're in Europe, you're in Canada, even the US have similar bills. We have states like Florida and Texas that are integrating social media bans. You think it's an accident that's going all over that's happening throughout the West? So clearly there's an agenda. Clearly we're not implicated in that agenda. And clearly the people that are pushing that agenda are not the people that we see on TV. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the WEF, and that's the progenitor in a way of the Trilateral Commission. If you look at the individuals who founded that, like Rockefeller and Brzezinski, as I said earlier, they had key roles in, both parties. Benjamin, your mute button is on. I just noticed. Good. Benjamin, you're somewhat of a libertarian. What do you think about this, man?
Where I want to approach this from is I'm an old school occultist. I'm actually a practicing lab alchemist. And where you really saw this subversion start, in my opinion, is in the late 1800s with Madame Blavatsky. And with Madame Blavatsky, a new type of occult got brought in. And this got passed on to Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey at the time was the head of what was called the Lucifer Trust, and it got renamed to the Lucius Trust for obvious reasons as it went more mainstream. And the Lucius Trust and Alice Bailey got named to the head of the UN, or to the spiritual head of the UN. And so from these people, we see derivative things like the feminist movement, the breakup of the nuclear family, the out of Africa theory, a lot of different things like that. And also from an occultist point of view, we see the hermaphroditic movement, where they try to turn everything hermaphroditic. And there's actually no historical evidence for this ever having been the case. Even the symbolism that's brought forward with it, which is Baphomet. Baphomet, the only historical context that we have for that is when the King of England was not a particularly powerful king, and he started taking out the more powerful figures in his kingdom in order to try and raise himself up with power. And the Knights Templar were one of those keys of power. And he also owed them quite a bit of money. So he had them executed. And part of the reasoning behind that was the worship of this Baphomet figure. Well, the Baphomet figure that's listed in that is a cat-faced deity and has nothing to do with the later represented Elias Levi goat with boobs and everything else figure. So we really start seeing this push in this hermaphroditism. Well, as a lab alchemist, like let's say I go and do spagyrics on a plant that's either a root plant or like a cannabis plant. A root plant's going to be very masculine because it's going to contain more salt than oil. It's going to be an earthy thing. And if I put it through the full spagyric process and bring it to what you would call the stone or the great work of that plant, it's still going to be masculine. Even though I've separated it into a masculine and feminine component and then reunited it, it's still overall a masculine plant. And the cannabis plant would still be an overall feminine plant after putting it through the great work. So for me, this move toward hermaphrodite is just a disempowering, where you don't ever see any of the people that are have been fooled by this propaganda. These aren't manly people. These aren't people that are very active and doing things. These are very useless sops of people. And I feel like that was the whole purpose behind it.
Guys, if anyone's saying anything that you want to chime in on, you can get in there. I wonder how much of this foreign policy exists in a form of breakaway civilization or a state within a state, in a sense. I remember reading about how Hitler's Reichsbank president Stadt maintained a corporate banking nexus during World War II and post-World War with the US through the Bank of International Settlements. And also the former head of the CIA, Alan Dulles, he had a very close relationship with the former intel head of the Nazis, Reinhard Gehlen. In fact, he recruited Reinhard Gehlen, I think, to be the point man for European operations. And then we've got the obvious paperclip scientists. So all of this is very suspect to me. And the public obviously never gave their approval to any of this, and that surely I must have affected domestic and foreign policy. And then you've got like the black budgets and the criminal budgets of the CIA. So is there anything in that you would like to pick apart, Matt?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit, and curious to see what everyone else has to say. It's you're right. For sure, I don't know if I'd term it breakaway society or breakaway government, but there is shadow government, that's for sure. And I think you're citing the Maison Rouge meeting that Himmler convened that involved Dulles's top guys in 1945 when it was becoming very clear that the war was going to go in a certain direction. And they basically had a meeting to discuss now the need to regroup and reformulate a new longer-term strategy that would involve more of a focus on consolidating corporate and banking control, out of which you had things like Le Cercle, the Pinet Cercle operation that still exists, very influential to this very day. In 1952, that was created as an outgrowth of that. And out of that as well was the Bilderberg Group, was seated as part of that continuity of plan, which Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who has been proven to have been, even though he denied it while he was alive, it's been discovered that he was, in fact, an SS officer, not just a Nazi, and a leading figure in the, there's a guy named Uwe Alschner, who's a friend of mine, and he's done some great historical research proving that Prince Bernhard was the guy who threw under the bus the major, or played a key role in overthrowing or sabotaging the Dutch resistance fighters against the Nazis during World War II. Bernhard was giving up their locations, their positions, their names. After he sort of left the Nazi party, he still kept his allegiance going. And you're right, like there's this massive network that was rearmed, redeployed under slightly more subtle techniques under Ellen Dulles' lead. British intelligence played a very big role at the paramilitary groups that were set up in various nations of the world, including the United States, including Canada, where these unreconstructed fascists from the French, I mean, Quebec was a big recipient for many of the French Vichy fascists that were brought in, interfacing very closely with people like Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who used this grouping to set up these anarcho-Maoist Leninist terrorist cells in Italy and Germany, like the Red Brigades that were used to carry out mass terrorist activity to keep the during the Cold War, to keep the population in a state of constant dis-ease and stress, so that we would give up our freedoms to have state control increasingly spread over our lives because terrorists. And the same thing in Quebec. We had the FLQ that had a lot of infiltration. I don't know whether they were always like this from the get-go, but it was proven that these same Operation Gladio networks in Canada were operating through the RCMP Special Operations Unit in the 1960s and throughout the 70s, when the RCMP was caught red-handed, seeding several of these cells. The COINTELPRO operation in the United States ran parallel to this, where they were basically running provocateurs and infiltrators to control and radicalize different civil rights groups, from MLK's groups to the Black Panthers, you name it. And that's something which just people didn't understand. They didn't take the time to properly take in what was being done to them. And you're right. So we had a bottom-up and top-down recapturing of the populations and of the governments of the world through the banking, the corporate sector on the one hand, the liberalization of the economies that happened after 1971, which resulted in the whole age of deregulation, the mergers and acquisitions that were made possible by no more government regulation of the banks on the corporations. The small and medium enterprises were wiped out under Reaganomics and Thatcherism. When Milton Friedman's ideas were brought in, free markets were told, that's the new way we're going to run the show. We're not going to have any type of nation state playing the role in the economy anymore. So that involved the crushing of like the vast majority of the small and medium businesses that couldn't compete with Monsanto's. And the banks just started gobbling each other up to become too big to fails, wiping out the small and medium local banks, which there were way more back, 30, 40 years ago than there are today. And the same thing happened in Canada. We had the destruction of our bank laws, the separation of investment, commercial, and insurance banks that were all separated. They were all allowed to like go under one-stop shop, multi behemoth institutions that could speculate with other people's money. And so again, bottom up, top down, capturing the whole way through. Yeah.
Jim, you were an advisor to Senate Republican leadership at one point in your career. How does that sync up with what we're discussing right now?
It's like being a Christian in Diocletian's court. I mean, I'm there trying to inject a note of sanity into it. Like I remember, I was there during the South Africa sanctions, the breakup of the whole Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, the Balkan Wars, the lead up to the Iraq Wars, and I guess was trying my best to explain, hey, this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea. This is not a good idea. You can see how much influence I had. That's why my book is called I Tried to Warn You. For picking up on what Matt said, I mean, you could also put in the same category the MI6 and CIA support for the Banderists and the other Ukrainian nationalist terrorists in the Soviet Union, from the end of World War II into the early 1950s. At the same time, I think sometimes it's hard to know, we were talking earlier about who are the shadowy figures who are really running things from above the scenes, behind the curtains and all that. But at the same time, some of these people are simply foot soldiers who are useful. I mean, you recruit all these various movements. Like, for example, look what happened after 9/11. We have all these people who said, oh, now we're declaring war on Islam. We're demonizing Islam. What was the first word out of George W. Bush's mouth? Islam, a wonderful religion of peace and tolerance that's been hijacked by cowardly terrorists. And then, of course, we've been then supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS and groups like this as our proxies. all over the Middle East, destroying Libya, overthrowing the government in Syria. Look, this guy Al-Jawlani or Al-Shara, whatever he calls himself this week. Now, this.
Yeah, he was a handsome man according to Trump.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that's right. Well, better be careful around Trump if he says that about you. Let's not even talk about Lindsey Graham, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have the growth of the power of the neoconservatives in Washington. Most of whom, but not all of them, are Jewish. You think, well, wait a minute, how can Islamic radicals repurpose Nazi and Jewish neoconservatives bed together? How does all of that work? Aren't they? Don't they have antipathy? Aren't they enemies of one another? Well, I think sometimes people, especially Americans, tend to fall into this kind of white hat, black hat thing. There's our guys, the good guys, and there's the bad guy. Well, no, there's also some gray guys that find some way to work together, or sometimes work parallel to one another without stepping on each other's toes. But I think a lot of these are instruments of policy. In other words, they're people we can use as disposable proxies when we need to, and then disavow them or pretend they don't exist when they do bad stuff. I mean, look what happened in Benghazi. You hear nobody who looked into that in Congress would point out the obvious thing that was an Al-Qaeda operation with the CIA to ship weapons from Gaddafi's stocks over to their friends in Libya. They didn't want to talk about that, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats. So, again, I think there's a lot of these moving parts. Some of them are simply tools, and some of them are masters. And sometimes it's not always easy to say which is which.
Yeah, I mean, that is very interesting, Operation Sycamore, and how the British intelligence, the US intelligence aided Wahhabi terrorists in getting into Syria and doing what they did there. And Benjamin, Nico, is there anything you'd like to say about that? Or before I move on to the next question?
No, not. Go ahead, Benjamin.
I would like to point out that it's pretty well known in the occult circles that these figures that we view as leaders are definitely not the ones calling the shots. And one of the ways that you can tell this is how often that they're subject to the same things that are being forced onto us. You look at like the Hollywoods figures, you look at a lot of these large corporation figures where all their children are basically non-binary. Their bloodlines have been effectively cut off. They're done. And so what we need to understand is those are the people we get to see that we're supposed to emulate. Those are the powerful people we should be emulating. And so this is how part of how it's getting forced on us, where the people that are actually in charge, they would never do this to themselves. Bloodlines are of the utmost importance to these people. This is how they maintain power.
Yeah, and that's interesting about when you're talking about kids and the whole the focus on them and the transgender thing, because I've had several individuals on my show who were in the GATE program, and you see that streamlining between those gifted children's programs like the GATE program to the other programs like Stargate, CIA programs there. So that really is a cause of concern, because it's happening in Canada.
What was in the pink drink?
Yeah. In fact, I think I was in the GATE program when I was a kid, because if you actually look at what they did, I know a few people in my own circle who recall that happening to them when they were in school. It was quite widespread. So I would like to transition this slightly to something different. So, okay, Benjamin, to what extent can the United States political system be considered truly independent when it is influenced by lobbying groups like AIPAC and wealthy donors such as Miriam Edelson, who has contributed something along the lines of 100 million to pro-Trump PACs in the last election? I mean, surely there's a quid pro quo there.
When we look at the way things operate right now, and Rand Paul really put a nose on this. I don't even understand how the Elon Musk and going and looking for fraud was shocking to people. Rand Paul every year in front of the Senate comes out and does like a 2-hour speech about that government waste and all those things. Well, also, you look at these kind of things. When he also comes in, he's the author of the One Bill movement. And so Rand Paul, again, to an empty Senate, just like with the fraud Senates, he comes out and says, here, this was dropped off. And he puts out something that looks like the New York phone book that no human could read inside of a year. And he says, this was dropped off at my door 4 hours ago. And now I'm expected to vote on this. And then I'm expected to vote on it. No human could read that and much less comprehend it in that kind of time. So what we understand is these donors, these people running the system, they're actually at this point entirely writing the laws. Our politicians that are passing the laws don't even know what's in there and don't care because that's not what they're paid to do.
Jim.
That's true. I mean, that's what staff work for, right? I mean, basically, the staff write the bills and the staff get the language for the bill from the lobbyists. That's the way it tends to work. I guess the question is this. I mean, there's been talk by people like, Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and, maybe a couple others, Thomas Massey, about forming another party. And look, I have to tell you, I don't think that's going to make any difference. I mean, first off, the Republicans and the Democrats have the system as rigged as the Communist Party of the Soviet Union did, as a one-party system. Ours is a ostensibly two-party system, really one party with two factions. And they basically agree on most, and you can have all we have third parties out the wazoo already. They simply cannot win. At least in a parliamentary system, you do find new parties who actually manage to get in parliament sometimes. Look, the FDA came out of nowhere a few years ago. That just can't happen in the United States. So I think we have to face the fact in this country that the system has become so totally dysfunctional that the only solution to it is going to be essentially the way the Soviet Union went in 1991. Something fundamental has to collapse, and then we'll see what happens after that. But the idea that somehow we're going to vote harder this time, and that we're going to pull ourselves out of this nosedive, I just think is look. Where I live down here in rural Virginia, all the people around here are great people. They're total Trump fans, or he can do no wrong. It's a cult of personality. Someone I would just call Trumpanzees. I mean, they just basically believe anything the man says, no matter how absurd it is. But that's sort of the emotional divide you find. Then on the other side, you have Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, anything and everything he does, he's a fascist, blah, blah, blah. In a way, I would say that Trump is becoming kind of like an American Gorbachev. He's like the catalyst that's going to speed up the ungluing of a system that no longer can be saved.
Nico.
You are bang on. This is exactly how I see American politics. He was brought in to do a job, and now it's even worse because he has 4 years and he can't be reelected. So the amount of policies, damage, however you want to call it, that he's going to bring in over the next 3 years is going to be very, very interesting to see. And we see the same thing in Canada. It's not even an American thing. Like in Canada, it's the same thing. We're supposed to have 5 parties. They're all different wings of the same bird. There's absolutely no difference between them. Our conservatives are liberals. Like our Overton window so far to the left that all of our parties are leftists. I'm sitting there as a conservative Christian and I'm not even on the radar. Like I don't fit anywhere on the political spectrum that we see in Canada. And I would go as far as to say that this is not corruption. This is how the system was built in Canada. This is the reality that we're facing every day. All the parties play the same tune. They just have a different color background, but they talk the same words. They don't agree. One of the things I think Vincent, you brought that up earlier, but I was watching the inauguration of the new ministers as part of this new government. They don't even pledge allegiance to Canada. They pledge allegiance to the crown.
Yes, yes.
And yet this is live on TV. Nobody talks about it. It's all, it's totally normal that we have our highest leaders in our government pledge allegiance to a foreign king. But this is the reality we're seeing in Canada. They don't pledge allegiance to Canadians. They don't care about Canadians. They care about their overlord, or probably somewhere part of Europe. And again, we can go down that rabbit hole, but at the end of the day, it does not matter the party you look at least in Canada. They all talk the same way. They all support the same thing. And one thing I always say to my listeners, if you really are hating, if you really hate your opponent because he's destroying the country that you love, would you shake his hand and tell jokes to him when the cameras are off? Because we see that in Canada all the time. Our two leaders are supposed to be the polar opposite. There's so many pictures of them hanging out together, laughing, shaking hands. Hey, if you're my enemy and you're destroying my country, I ain't shaking your hand. I do not want to be close to you. You are destroying the country that I love. Yet, it's politics. It's, how could you call it? It's entertainment for the masses. It's nothing different than what Romans did 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Bread and circuses for the masses.
Can I add a footnote on Trump? The one question I do have is whether he was brought in by, you might say, the Peter Thiel, Palantir, CIA wing of the party in a last-ditch effort to try to save the system, or whether this was planned as some kind of controlled demolition. I tend toward the former. I don't think there is anything to be gained by a controlled demolition. I could see that they looked at the excesses of the Biden-Harris regime, though everything was coming unglued at that point, and they figured we need to play the patriotic card here by bringing in the America First guy, who of course is anything but, and try to hope that somehow he can pull things out of the nosedive. But as I say, I think he's accelerating. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was actually brought in to collapse the whole system. I don't think so, though.
But you want to roll over the collapsed system. That's the whole point, right? At least that's what we're seeing in Canada.
Well, if all those people that are behind, we keep talking about, maybe that's their plan, that, they'll be left holding all the pieces when everything collapses. I don't know.
Well, and the most credible version I hear is where our economy needs to be replaced, and it's going to be with a digital economy.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's got to be the sacrificial lamb that takes the hit on this.
Mm-hmm.
But you look, this is happening throughout the West, right? And look at a country like Canada that arguably has the most natural resources in the world. Like wherever you look, we have as many natural resources as a country that should be as rich as Saudi Arabia. Yet our economy is collapsing. You're not going to tell me that this is an accident. It's done on purpose. But if you look at Canada as a part of the world, a one world organization, which our prime minister is very open about the fact that he's a globalist, that he is for a one world government. He says it all the time, that we need a new world government. He said it when he was at the WEF. Speaking his last speech in Davos, he was actually speaking about this. So what would you want if you're looking at a one world government? Canada is one of the strongest, the strongest asset you can own in the world. You want Canada to be intact the way that it is now. How do you get that in the hand of a one world government? You collapse the economy. And then you can buy everything for dimes on the dollar, for cents on the dollar, for fractions of a cent on the dollar. So if you kind of reshape your perspective to look at it from a world's perspective, if you had a one world government, Canada's the place you want to destroy.
I'll just say one little thing on the issue, both of the one world government and of Canada and of the occult, because I think the theosophist angle is extremely important. I'm happy that you brought that up, because Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton played a very big role, both working with Eliphas Levi with the occult revival in the end of the 19th century, but he's actually the guy who encouraged Eliphas Levi to start writing many of his books on, anyway, that's a side thing. But he also was the minister of the colonies for the British Empire under Lord Disraeli, who was a childhood friend of his. And he, as minister of the colonies, he made the point very concisely in 1859 that Vancouver would necessarily be the capital of a new British Empire at some point in the future, because part of their initiation ceremony was this fixation about creating this very, very fluid, all-embracing kind of syncretic perennial philosophy, taking sort of the the weakest hullabaloo from all of the world's different cultures and compositing that as Blavatsky did in her secret doctrine, and creating something that is will just absorb anybody and everybody into this blob of oneness. And so the spiritual warfare department that I think is sort of like the Theosophists played such an important role that people can't even imagine.
They had a wing of the Catholic Church. They had a wing in the Catholic Church. How wild is that?
Yeah. Well, and that was part of the defrocked. I mean, Eliphas Levi was a defrocked priest, and he oversaw the whole like French, the French Gnostic infiltration of the occult into the Catholic Church. He already set the stage. That was then picked up by Alice Bailey and company later on. That just took what he already set up as an infrastructure. So these guys were
he brought in the Kabbalah into the occult and forced Kabbalah into it. And he's the one who tied all the Kabbalistic letters to the tarot and all that kind of thing. He fully moved Kabbalistic mysticism into the rest of the occult world, and they just wiped out all the occult knowledge. Like before that, Germanic, if you look in the early 1800s, if you did not have a pedigree from a Germanic occultist, you didn't mean shit in the occult world. And after that, after the Elias Levi, it turned more Kabbalistic, and it just totally moved that out of the way.
Yeah, well, the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, the whole Rosicrucian operation, it's really into the whole Canadian story as well as the American story and Indian story. I mean, the Theosophists were creating the India Congress Party as well. Like Gandhi was getting trained in London at the temple, the inner temple, on how to become a Hindu by going to theosophical meetings who were teaching him how to read and study the Bhagavad Gitas. I mean, come on, like Vincent is running the India Congress Party and absorbing all of the different revolutionary tendencies. It's just nuts. And then they're bringing that into the West and saying, hey, this is India. It's this British revamped thing we're now calling Hinduism. We're going to now sell it to the Western world as this new exotic thing to replace, Christianity.
Well, we kind of had discussed that, covered that in our episode together, Matthew. We were going over Swami Vivekananda and that.
Right.
It's interesting when you're discussing Gnosticism, because there is that sectarian difference. The difference is there. So, occultism. You've got the German OTO, the US OTO, and I believe the US OTO describes itself as a caliphate. And that's quite interesting, that in and of itself. And the whole Eliphas Levi, it was many a moon ago when I read Eliphas Levi, the transcendental magic. Wasn't he advocating the idea that there were different ethers, and the magnetism was tied to that, and our spiritual energy could, migrate into the ether and stuff like that?
I can speak to that, but I feel like I've been hogging the mic. I don't know if.
Well, anyone that knows what we're talking about, chime in.
Go ahead.
That polarization is required for energy, straight out. And they've taken this into the political system. This is part of why you need the Democrats and the Republicans. You need the baby face and the heel in WWF terms. You need that. If you don't have a bad guy that you can despise, you can't have a good guy that you love. Without the threat, there is no hero. That's just the way the world works. And they understand this. This is part of why you get the Hegelian dialectic. We give you this problem, we give you the answer. It's a nice system. Yeah. And also, one thing I wanted to mention about the way Matthew worded that the Canadian people are being forced to swear allegiance basically to the crown. Well, which is an interesting thing, because this isn't the Britain, which is what most people would understand. They don't understand the city-state of London in and of itself, and the way you made that sound, it would have been toward the city-state of London and not toward the Greater Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Royal Mail.
Yeah. I mean, it is startling to actually listen to Mark Carney do his pledge of allegiance to his oath of allegiance to the Privy Council and to the Crown, and to do as a good servant ought to do for His Majesty and his heirs into perpetuity. It's all part of it's disgusting to think that that's actually what every prime minister has said to have, as well as every member of the shadow cabinet. So everybody who's going to have any access to any type of sensitive information has to do the Chatham House Rules Pledge of Allegiance thing to keep secret all secrets that should be kept secret by a servant of the Majesty. It's nuts. But for the ether thing too, yeah, like it, yes, everyone knew that there must be some form of very subtle medium through which light travels between stars and to us.
Yes.
You can't have empty space. But how do we conceptualize the nature of the thing that the light is moving through?
Mhm.
And the alternative that people like Eliphas Levi were trying to define into sort of this magical box was that this is the astral plane through which the spirits that we're all walking around with, like emotional imprints of our dual self in the spirit realm that is charged based upon our emotional intensity or unwillingness to accept our mortality or not and hang on. So with that idea, you could have the realm of ghosts. He's part of this ghost research movement that Bulwer Lytton and Sir William Crookes, the guy who's the head of the Royal Society and the Ghost Club with Thomas Huxley, and these guys are all trying to create scientific experiments to justify why the trance mediums and the spiritualist movement that's spread all over the United States and Europe and going into the courts of Europe and Russia to try to like persuade
philosophical mercury is what we're talking about right now. The philosophical mercury.
Yeah,
I have a question though. I mean,
yeah.
Do these people actually believe in this stuff in a spiritual sense? I mean, do they actually believe that
it's weird, man?
In other words, that that non-human spiritual beings are part of what in other words, or is this just a conscious manipulation?
That's what's confusing, because they do magic tricks and lie to make the tables levitate, and they use all sorts of like magic tricks to pass on the idea that they have these powers, and they're caught red-handed, and they know that they're doing tricks. But yet at the same time, they seem to believe as well that they're also interfacing with the demons and the archons.
Matthew, Jim, I mean, when you take something like the Babylon working in the Mojave Desert, I think Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard really genuinely believed that they were doing something there.
Yeah, you don't do that shit if you don't really believe you're
dealing
with something real.
I think a lot of these people, either wittingly or unwittingly, are in contact with spiritual intelligence that they may not even consciously believe in, but nonetheless is influencing their actions in a way that they're not. In other words, I think that, again, get back to the puppet things. When we get to the highest level of puppetry here, maybe the puppet master is not even human. It's a superhuman intelligence of some sort of spiritual intelligence, and these people are basically dupes or servants in some way that they don't even fully understand themselves.
Well, Jim, you've got Congresswoman Luna testifying or discussing about how extra dimensional entities are interacting with individuals and leaving technology behind. Isn't that a form of occultism, of spirituality?
It sounds like it, but when she talks, she's so cute. I don't really listen to what she says.
Yeah, she's an attractive woman. What we're talking about in all of this is the mercurial aspect. So, like when again, the original occult before it got brought in, one of the things that Blavatsky did was take the lab out of the occult. So she brought in the teachings of Carl Jung, which, don't get me wrong, Jung was a brilliant psychologist, but was not a practicing alchemist. What happened was some of his ideas behind a public subconscious or a zeitgeist, what the ideas behind it in modern symbolism, he couldn't find anything that matched, and he looked at some old alchemy books and said, wow, this matches what I'm kind of mentally imaging. And so he brought that in without really understanding how the alchemical system works. And when you're looking at it like in a simple spagyrics way, which from an occultist, as above so below, the reason that you use spagyrics is because things work at the lowest level the same as they do the highest level, and it's easier to understand.
Benjamin, sorry for interrupting. What is spagyrics? Could you just explain that for me?
Spagyrics is performing the great work on the plant level of being. So you have the different levels of existence, and the plant level is one of the easiest, where you get the threefold understanding. And so you can separate the plant into its salt, its sulfur, and its mercury. Now, what the mercury is representing is the feminine, or the ether, the thing that is neutral, and then it's allowing the transition. And this is why Mercury, and in all of its philosophical elements, has like a liquid. It always has to be like a liquid, because in order for that energy to travel, it has to travel through liquid. And so the Mercury is making the transition of the broken and polarized masculine. This is where I brought in the polarization. I'm sorry, earlier I just started making leaps. I gotta back it down when I'm talking about a cult sometimes. So you have the broken masculine, which is your sulfur and your salt, and then the Mercury is your feminine, where these transactions can happen. That's why Mercury's the messenger, the overseas transactions, all these kind of things. And in fact, the original Mercury story, it steals Apollo's cattle, takes those to Earth and into a cave, and then takes music or sound back up to the gods. And there's an entire transaction that happens there. This only happens with Mercury, because without the liquid, the connection can't be made. So what needs to happen alchemically is you purify the three different elements, and then through the Mercury, the sulfur will go and lock in with the salt. This is the masculine, the two aspects of the masculine reuniting and becoming a perfect masculine. And then that does the alchemical marriage with the feminine. And so it's the energy that's passing, that transition of energy. And when you're looking at sulfur, sulfur is like the life element. So if I do an extraction on a live plant, which includes me having to cryogenically freeze it, which means that as soon as I harvest that plant, before sunlight touches it, I put it in negative 150-degree slurry, and that thing, it doesn't even know that it died. It just like, and so when I do the extraction out of that, the sulfur element of that will be a neon yellow. It's like screaming with life. Now, if I dry it and do it with a dried herb, the sulfur in there will back down to like a normal golden color, not that bright neon yellow. And if I wait, say 6 months, that sulfur element is going to go to a red and then a black. And you're not going to get the same efficacy out of the product in any way, shape, or form. You're going to be lucky if it crystallizes and solidifies at all and doesn't just remain a goo. Because the decarbylation process has already happened, so it doesn't want to reach its crystallized form anymore, and then the entire great work is gone. It's all those understandings that we're supposed to carry on with this whole fucking system. Well, when you switched it to Jung, and also the other big thing that she added in was Gottfried Higgins' work. And he was Anacalypsis was his book. This book was such hot garbage that the occultists of the day wouldn't have anything to do with it. He made 400 copies, all of which sat and rotted. And then like his great grandson found them, and a couple of the copies was able to, in the new era of cheap printing, have those printed by one of the respected presses. So this gained popularity then at that point in time through people like Blavatsky, who brought that in. I call it Dr. Seuss occultism, where they literally take words that sound like each other, and they're like, Isis is Ishtar, is Easter is Eoster. Like, you're a jackass. That is what you are, sir.
Yeah, well,
Can I say? I never thought of Mercury being female. How? I mean, this sounds like some kind of a chemical version of Kabbalah or tantric. Some kind of cosmic sexual concept that applied to chemistry.
Okay, so when you look at the original creation, you had the all, the I am, the singularity. And then in order to understand itself, it had to split, so it had something to compare itself off of, because you need something to measure yourself from. So it had to split. It's split into a masculine and feminine. But the problem is these two things just balance each other out. They're just completely opposite, and you don't really see anything. So then the masculine side of it, which is the material for the masculine and the immaterial for the feminine, the masculine in and of itself splits into a fire and ice. These are two polar opposites pushing against each other. The feminine immaterial, or the void, pulls these two pieces together where you have the Vesca Pisces form, and that's where the life forms, or the ego, the third thing that isn't one of, it's not this or this, but it's both. And it's its own individual thing. And this is where you start seeing life. So this is just basic. This used to be just basic occultism, like, you know, before they took and made it Kabbalistic. And again, this is something that, so the feminine, that feminine Ganunga gap, the immaterial, the thing that gives life and destroys, actually she destroys first, pulls them together, and you have destruction. And from the destruction, you have life. And so
Benjamin, try and wrap us a bit up here, because I need to move on.
Sounds like Kali.
Nico, I would like to ask, do you think UFOs is a more modern manifestation of old-fashioned occultism? Because I've got a quote here from a former CIA director, Walter Bedell Smith, and he said, "I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal in which it is concluded that the unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare. I suggest we discuss this as soon as possible." I think that's a very interesting message quote there.
That is a very, very good question. I've been following the whole UFO agenda, storyline, however you want to call it, since I've been 10 or 14 years old. And the more it looks like it's all an illusion, like everything we're seeing right now seems like it's just all part of, I believe it's called Bluebeam, right? The Project Bluebeam. It's all a idea to make us unite under the same world religion, if you will. I want to believe, as a Christian, I believe that there are fallen angels. So call them UFOs, call them demons, call them whatever you want. There are interdimensional being. There's no way in hell that we're alone. Like, let's be real here for a second. But at the same time, is that what we're seeing? What's being disclosed, and I'm going to air quote disclosed here, what's being revealed or disclosed to us, is it real? I don't think so. I personally, the more that it goes, the more that even Trump talks about this. Like, this is how much of a joke it's become. It's becoming mainstream. Why would it be mainstream? Because they're telling us a story. What's the story? Unification. Because, you know, I've been listening to Matt and Benjamin speak, and all I can hear is that at the end of the day, what they want is to unify us. Is all for us, all the people around the world, to agree to one single system. How would they do that? Find a common enemy. Find a common source to be against it. What is greater?
Nico, sorry for interrupting, but in a way, don't all religions do that? Try to unite us under a certain banner, whether it's the cross or...
Yeah, but not necessarily by creating an enemy. That's the thing. That's the big difference. If you're, you know, the Independence Day, you guys have seen Independence Day with Will Smith in the 90s, and the guy that plays the president basically says that the extraterrestrial are a common enemy to unify under. So for all creation, all humans to unify under. And this is what I'm seeing right now with that whole UFO. I don't even know what the right term is to describe that wave of new UFO that's coming on, because it is not the same as what was pushed by us or pushed to us 20, 30 years ago. It seems like it's completely changed. And now it just seems like a very good idea to create a common enemy to scare people into giving their rights away, like they've been making us do for thousands of years. It's always the same game plan. It never changes. It's always reused, but they have a new form of UFO. Now, again, is it real? Is it not? I have a tendency to believe that everything we're seeing is not real. And God knows AI is making it a lot easier to be lied to.
Nico, I see behind you there's a cross, and it's obviously a sacred symbol. But to me, I think the UFO now is becoming a sacred symbol. I've got a member of the Railings cult coming on my show very soon. And they're a very, I mean, if I remember it was in 2002, they claim to have called a person. They have a number of hospitals and clinics. I think it was in Israel where they claimed they cloned a couple of children. And I've also got Grant Cameron coming on my show in a couple of weeks, and he's a prominent voice in ufology. So I'm very open-minded in regards to whether or not there's extraterrestrial life somewhere. However, there does seem to be something else that's trying to make an agenda out of it and push it. And sometimes there is this cultish aspect to it, whether it's Heaven's Gate, whether it's the Railings. But yeah, I'm not sure myself, but they are definitely trying to make it into a religion.
I agree completely. And it's been throughout history, right? I'm a big fan of Peru. I spent a bunch of time backpacking through Peru, and one of the places that we made to go see, we went to go see the elongated skulls. So those replications of entities that do not come from here has been around all over the world. You can see it in Egypt, you can see it in Central America, you can see it throughout the world. How do you explain it? I don't know, but I do not think that we're dealing with the same type of... Again, I'm trying to find what the proper word is for here, and I'm lacking the terms to describe it. It just seems like the message,
something like that.
It's something like that. The message that we're being pushed is not the same as we've seen throughout history. It seems like there's definitely an agenda that is being pushed right now, and Blue Beam to me is exactly what's going on. It's coming to a place where they're selling us the lie to unify us on under one banner, and finding a common enemy that does not come from Earth is probably the best way to push such an agenda.
But doesn't it all begin the same way when it comes to religions? And if we're going to include ufology in that, it usually starts with an event or number of events, and then they are the interpretations of the events, and then following the interpretations, they are the emergence of different sects. And we see that with Christianity, we see that with Islam, and we see that with occultism. You know, we could allude to the different branches of the OTO. And you've got the Typhonian Order, which is the most modern incarnation of the OTO. Isn't that just inherent in human nature?
The difference being today, though, as somebody that comes from the technology world, that comes from telecommunication, the difference now is we have the technology to push it to a wider sphere. And this is what's very problematic with what we're seeing throughout the world is AI and our technology enables to fake this on such a massive scale that just dig into Blue Beam. They're talking about technology that will send voices to your head, that will actually talk to you from far away, that you think that you're hearing it yourself. And this is
didn't they do that with MK Ultra sub project 119? Am I correct there, Matt?
And I'm from Montreal. MK Ultra was tested here, like literally.
Yes.
That's why we need tinfoil hats to keep those voices out of us.
Look what right here.
It was a change, but it was a real thing, Jim. That we were doing back in the 60s.
Yeah, of course it was. I mean, look, back to what Nico was saying earlier. I mean, I also believe that if there is something to these phenomena, and it's not just something being peddled by the government for control purposes, I do believe that, it's something demonic, that these are the kind of things that in a previous, quote, non-scientific world would have been attributed to demonic activity. And I think that's real. In terms of why the government is peddling this stuff, I think Nico is also correct, that there's some kind of an agenda they have that frankly probably fits into all the other stuff we've been talking about for the last hour or so, where these people have something in mind for what they want for us. Because after all, what are we to them? We're just cattle. and we're just meat that they could herd around and manipulate.
And that was the question I had for you guys out there. What do you think the whole intent is? Because I agree with you that to me, it's spiritual in nature. The war we're fighting right now is spiritual in nature. Once you accept that there's good and evil, everything we're seeing today makes sense. But is that what you guys think is going on here? That
Well,
there are evil intent?
Well, to start with, I think depopulation is somewhere high on the radar screen in terms of there's just too many useless eaters from the point of view of the people who run things. And that, look, I don't know if we're looking at a major war in the near future, or again another pandemic or something. But I think there's some way that they feel they need to cull the herd on a massive scale. I don't know how exactly that would happen. I think that would be one step.
Well, do you know what? That's a good bridge for me to transition us to the next question. I would just like to play a clip here.
It seems through pokey pokes seems to be rather than the culling.
The States conducted this operation with a very clear goal in mind. I haven't got a chance to see a lot of reporting. I don't understand what the confusion is. Let me explain it to you, and I'll do it once again as clearly as possible. Perhaps you'll report it that way. The United States is conducting an operation to eliminate the threat of Iran's short-range ballistic missiles and the threat posed by their Navy, particularly to naval assets. That is what it is focused on doing right now, and it's doing quite successfully. I'll leave it to the Pentagon and the Department of War to discuss the tactics behind that and the progress that's being made. That is the clear objective of this mission. The second question that's been asked is, why now? Well, there's two reasons why now. The first is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond against the United States. The orders had been delegated down to the field commanders. It was automatic, and in fact, it bared to be true, because in fact, within an hour of the initial attack on the leadership compound, the missile forces in the south and in the north, for that matter, had already been activated to launch. In fact, those had already been pre-positioned. The third is the assessment that was made that if we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would...
Sorry, Benjamin, I played that precisely when you started speaking. So, to what extent does the recent US war with Iran highlight that absence of accountability for elected American officials in foreign policy? So, if the head of Mossad and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are able to steer the US into a war that's against its own interests, what does that say about external influence over US decision making, Jim?
There are two schools of thought on this, and I'm actually on the third. I mean, there's some people who will say that Israel is simply a proxy of the United States, like Ukraine is. It's just our aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and that they're simply puppets of the United States. And there are other people who will see the other way around. The United States is simply controlled by Israel and led around by the nose. I tend to fall into the camp that says it's not as simple as that. That, again, back to what we were talking about earlier with the British and many other governments around the world, that there's a network of power that is truly transnational. And it has, let's say, many nodes of power, whether they're in Israel, whether in the United States, on Wall Street, or in Hollywood, or in the pharmaceutical industry and the banks and all the rest of it, the city of London. You go down the list, and these are important nodes. Obviously, the intelligence agencies, both MI6, the CIA, Mossad, all of them. And that, again, in a way, the only thing I can liken it to is kind of the network of power that existed within the Soviet Union before its collapse, that this one is not confined to one country. So, yes, of course, it has nothing to do with the American interest. Hell, I'm not even sure this is in Israel's interest. It's going to get Israel destroyed the way these idiots are going. But but I don't think it's as simple as just saying that Trump is led around by the nose by Netanyahu. That having been said, however, that I don't think Mr. Trump is an independent actor at all. I don't know whether it's as simple as saying what's in the Epstein files, or maybe, hey, Mr. Trump, you need to watch that Zapruder film from Dallas in 1963 again. That, if you don't do what you're told, we'll find somebody who will. I don't really know. But in any case, all this talk about we're going to bring the Israelis to heel and we're going to force them to pull out of Lebanon, and there's a big feud between Netanyahu and Trump, or between Zelensky and Trump. I don't buy a word of it. I think a lot of this, sure, they may hate each other as individuals, but I think they're on the same page. And a lot of this is the kind of, jockeying around you find within an establishment among various constituency and personalities. But when all's said and done, they're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I would just,
Matt.
I agree in general with that. Can I throw in a thought?
Yeah.
I always go back to ultimately, and I remember back in 2019, I had written to Jim, asking Jim, hey, what's up with the Pope's personal designer of all the papal outfits? Yeah, remember that? I sent you like this link to this guy, and I was like, he seems to be a Satanist. He has a line of perfume, one of the scents being 666, and he has a website. He's very open about it, and he's a clear practicing Satanist. He's got his website with gimp masks and sadomasochistic motifs and all of this weird stuff. And I'm like, this is the official designer of all of the cardinals, all of the outfits, the official designer. They let him do this. So I'm like, Jim, what's going on, dude? And I remember I was at that time that I began to realize I got to take this satanic element way more seriously than I was, because I was doing conventional old school geopolitical analysis up until that time. I started realizing I got to shift gears mentally here a lot more than I was before. The Babylon working ritual seems like a really big deal in things. John Dee and Edward Kelly were already spinning some of this stuff, like setting the groundwork for a lot of the sex magic to invoke certain kinds of demons. They had a certain esoteric and exoteric, technique in their writings. And
Solomnic.
What was that?
Solomnic demons.
Okay, yeah, Solomonic, right? Yeah. Yeah, and all of these guys are all following the Testament of Solomon manuscript that presents this idea that Solomon, it's not the biblical Solomon. Yeah, there you go. That's one. Crowley loved that thing, right? Crowley's, yeah. So there you go. It's the Goetia. Yeah. So it's like a medieval, it was something that was produced in like the 12th century. This Testament of Solomon. They act like it's super ancient, but it create, there's a certain, it's not. It's not pretty, but within their rituals, what these guys have all been obsessed with is like, creating a certain kind of sex magic ritual that involves certain kinds of sacrifice along the way over the course of several months that will somehow invoke the Antichrist. And they're all obsessed with it, right? Everyone's obsessed. Parsons and Hubbard probably did one of the most famous.
Does it involve children?
Not directly in their writings, but I would say probably. Yeah, even Crowley presents in his Book of the Law certain prescriptions on how do you select the best child sacrifice. And he says, oh, I'm joking, or I'm using a metaphor for my semen. But I don't think so. I think that these guys I think he's being very literal and hoping people don't take his literal words literally.
Have you seen some of the art some of these people hang in their houses?
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, look at the Podestas and it's sick, right? But the influence of the Scientologists, like L. Ron Hubbard, who was he was like the Edward Kelly to Jack Parsons, John Dee in the desert for the 3 months in 46. This guy his creation of Scientology was not like something other than what he saw as his purpose in life to continue the mission of Aleister Crowley when Crowley died. And the influence of the Scientologists, which has like, I think the operating thetan is a little bit of a joke. It's like it's the OT, the OT 1, OT, all the way to, well, now it's, I think, up to like 9 or something. But the level 8 is the Antichrist degree that went public in the early 80s that Hubbard wrote before or at least it was made public before Hubbard died. These guys are really, and it's a UFO cult too. Like part of their thesis is that there's these disembodied alien entities that make up our entire existence.
You got to pay to get rid of them.
Yeah, you got to pay a lot of money.
Sorry, that's why I was speaking earlier about how they are now interpreting these events differently, and the UFOs are these new modern manifestations of something that would have historically been interpreted as demonic.
Well, yeah, I mean, they treat them, it's kind of like archons, you know, the way, but, and the Falun Gong kind of have their own variation of the same thing.
Well,
like,
we had that difference the last time, Matthew, in terms of Gnosticism, where I don't have that sort of I don't know the right word, enmity. I don't think it's as
yeah, don't worry about it. I'm not attacking Gnosticism right now. I'm just simply saying that this is what these guys are framing their definition of these entities that are making up our physical emotions and that we have to be cleansed of. That's all I'm saying right now. And the if you read the writings of Master Li Hongji, who runs Falun Gong, same kind of thing, and it seems to have been spun as a synthetic UFO cult out of Esalen and the Human Potential Movement, the same Human Potential Movement that was running Stephen Greer, that he was working for, funded by Lawrence Rockefeller. Greer being a guy who was working for the Baha'i movement in their headquarters in Israel in the 70s, before he goes on to his, UFOs are our savior shtick. Also funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, who's also funding John Podesta to be one of his emissaries for the new dispensation of UFOs. But along this whole thing, I think Israel was set up. See, if you look at the creation of Israel, it was about a year after the Babylon working was done. And I think these guys, if you look at Greater Israel as a map of what they want to invoke as the finalization of the Greater Israel objective, the overlap it to Nebuchadnezzar's Neo-Babylonian Empire when the Jews were in captivity in Babylon. It's almost a direct overlap. It's it's not different enough.
And I think that goes well beyond just the idea of a small state in the Middle East that's got of influence as a foreign lobby. I mean, it's a much bigger picture that involves a number of actors that are not confined by any means to Israel.
No. Well, all this plays to the origins of Christianity, where you see the Roman Empire, and at that point in time, they were by force failing to subdue the northern European pagan lands, the heathens and the Celtics. In fact, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest basically stopped all Roman expansion north. They're like, yeah, not dealing with these people. And so they
it could have gone better,
Yeah, could have went better. Three Roman legions, including their camp followers, didn't make it home. Weird. So there's a lot of speculation that Christianity was literally piecemeal put together in order to spiritually subdue and got pushed into the northern tribes, including taking, if you look at all the symbolism in Christianity, even things like that cross in the background right there, that's not even supposedly the cross that Jesus was ever crucified on. They didn't do it like that. That is Irminsul, Odin's symbol. And so, and they take the symbology, whether it's Christmas, there's no actual record of Jesus's birth date, and they overlay it over the most important holiday.
All right, Benjamin. Nico and I are going to have to take you on if we're going to go down this road.
Go for it.
I would love to, Jim. You and I can just do my show, and Nico, I think all.
Well, look, I think for the sake of this particular platform and discussion, we should keep it moving on the geopolitical
no, totally
analysis.
on that.
This could easily be a full show.
Also, if you guys have done a lot of talk of the OTO, if you guys ever want to see me just out of hand doing a cult basically showdown with one of the heads of the OTO, Alan Greenfeld, number 79 on Weaving Spiders, welcome. I tear that guy up.
Really? Live? Like physically with him there?
No, like we are right now. Yeah, on stream. Yes,
I would like to see that. That guy sucks.
Yeah, I would like to send that to us.
Yeah, please.
I show the world how absolutely pathetic these people are in their knowledge of occult and what it is. I get this guy to admit it. He goes, oh, well, some people would do physical alchemy, and he totally admits that it's through the spiritual alchemy component that they brought in, that once you didn't have to match your works with the lab, you could make this deviation. And because the things that I say as above, so below, I have to be able to also make happen in a lab. And once you take that out, you can say whatever you want.
Guys, I'm going to need to make a deviation back to the question about foreign policy and Mossad and Netanyahu. Nico, I was asking about how the head of Mossad and Netanyahu were able to steer the conflict, cause the conflict or steer Donald Trump into launching this war, and what does that say about external influence over US decision making? What do you think about that?
It's happening everywhere throughout the world, so it's not an American. The same thing is happening here in Canada. The same thing is happening overseas. It is, again, everything to me steers towards a new world order, one single government, and they're destabilizing one of the most important thing that we have, oil and gas. That's what's happening right now. This is all about creating chaos. What you're seeing between the clip you played earlier, between the US and Iran involving Israel. I don't even care who leads who. At the end of the day, the goal is still the same, to usher in this one world government. And no matter where you look, we're being steered this way. This is all I see from here. Because, again, look at our prime minister, Mark Carney. Read his book, Values. He tells you exactly what his game plan is. He's using the green agenda in order to usher in a very communist one world government. That's all it's about. And that's all we're seeing. And I don't think there's any difference between what's happening in the US and what's happening in Canada and what's happening throughout the world. They're players playing the game that they're being told to play.
But I don't know if it's just that Netanyahu and Trump have just got these overlaps of interest. Trump, for years before he was re-elected, when he was campaigning, he was campaigning against Iran. You heard him ad nauseum with every rally speaking out against Iran. So it's not a new thing. Maybe there's just that overlap. I mean, you do have the overlaps with occultism, with these secret societies, with the Trilateral Commission, with the CFR. And then we could go to how Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff, these guys were Scientologists, but they were also in SRI. So there are just these overlaps, these spider webs, these connections. Could it be that they just have shared interests? Opposed to,
At that level, yes. At that level, yes, but not at the upper level that we don't get to see who's ruling. Because, there's two thoughts of theories here. One of my best friend always said that he does not believe in the man behind the curtains. He just thinks that people are they just care about themselves. They're simply selfish and they find alliances like what you're describing. So you either believe that people are just selfish and it just aligns with other people because they want more power. And what's the point of power is more power. There's nothing else to it. Or you have people that are trying to mold us into one single entity. Whatever you look, any way you look at it, it ain't good. It shows human nature.
Well,
Benjamin, do you think Trump is really steering US foreign policy here? Or is he just subject to being manipulated by much more wiser and intelligent officials in these secret societies?
I think that his bloodline is tied into the Chabad Lubavitch line. And when you're looking at every religion has its extremists, and then it's mainstream people, and they're extremist, and he's married fully into that line and definitely taking their plan on. And I would say that he doesn't own himself at all, in my opinion.
Because I've seen you participate in, debates in the tomato, and there's always that usually quite spirited and a good variation of opinion. But it still really confounds me how I see, and I'm not going to name any names, but so many names really on that Trump train, and they're not willing to deviate, that no matter what he says, and then veers off and does something different, they are on board. I really do believe he could go out on 2nd Avenue and shoot someone, and he would probably still defend him. And I did support Trump. I supported him originally. I supported him when he was running against Joe Biden, and then he ran against Joe Biden again. And when there was that attempted assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, with the American flag billowing in the background and the blood trickling down his head, that was a powerful image. That was a powerful scene. And everyone that saw that knew that he was going to win right there and then. However, he has... Yes, go ahead.
When you juxtapose that image that you just said with transsexual males dressed as strippers reading books to children, this is why that entire trope and things like it got introduced to the American psyche. Because, like I said earlier, you can't have the Hulk Hogan without the Andre the Giant. You've got to have somebody you absolutely despise. And I can't think of anything to despise more than somebody sexualizing themselves in front of little children.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Matt, you had something, right?
World Wrestling Federation for sure, and Trump's involvement in the World Wrestling Federation is not to be ignored.
I'm 90% convinced Butler was staged. I mean, I'm
100% convinced. I'm beyond. Yeah, it was staged. It's a show. It's kabuki theater. The thing that got me as well, in terms of this blurring of reality and fiction, which has been going on through the Cold War, and it's getting worse and worse with every day. And the world wrestling genre didn't help as well to that process is also a very disturbing thing, which people think is sometimes a little trivial. I don't see this as trivial at all. And I'm not saying I think Trump is the Antichrist. However, his choice to in 1999 to give his Manhattan apartment, the gilded gold Apollonian apartment with the paintings everywhere, that one that he wanted that to be the location where in Devil's Advocate, the movie with Al Pacino playing the devil.
Oh, really? Wow.
Who's the devil's son that the devil is trying to recruit into his law firm.
Yes.
In order, the motive is ultimately for Keanu Reeves to sell his soul by defending this Trump character, who's this billionaire real estate magnate in New York, who killed a kid and 2 women and has to be defended. Everyone knows he did it, but Keanu has to defend him anyway as part of his test. He does a good job. And part of the outcome that Al Pacino had in mind is to get Keanu to have sex with his sister in order to give birth to the Antichrist. And that's like the big ending of the movie, right?
Well,
and the fact that Trump wanted that scene to be performed in his apartment bothers me immensely.
What's the name of the movie again? What's the name of the movie?
Devil's
again?
Advocate. It's very well done.
The monologue at the end of Devil's Advocate is phenomenal.
Well, it's interesting because, you've seen the way, they've had these metal structs showing Trump as the new Cyrus. He's going to rebuild the temple and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it's not so much he's the Antichrist. He's like the Antichrist John the Baptist. He's the guy who's going to prepare the ground for him.
Well, I think so. My thinking here is if you read Rene Girard, Girard has a big thesis on his mimetic theory is involved with the idea that nobody does anything for any internal reason. We only do things because we want to emulate others, and everybody wants greed. We want wealth. Yeah. So all systems go into disequilibrium because everybody will want to maximize their pleasure ultimately, which results in more scarcity, more room for conflict, and thus chaos of the system unless you can get a scapegoat. So he's got this whole thesis of a scapegoat that highly influenced Peter Thiel, who became very obsessed with the Antichrist around this time. And the scapegoat is like the person that everyone can agree to hate, that will then be sacrificed collectively, that we all then release the tension and the system can go back to some kind of stabilization or harmony for a period before you have to do it all over again. And in Girard's world, he says that's why the Roman Empire was viable, because of the sacred sacrifice of Remus by Romulus. That's why Christianity is viable, because the sacred sacrifice of Jesus, that's how he says it, or that Judaism became viable because of the idea of Cain and Abel. And so you have to have the sacred kill. And I think part of the idea of them creating Babylon, that's a hypothesis I'm working on right now. I think it's solid though.
Matt, how does the Antichrist, so it's not the Antichrist, how does Satan at the end of the Devil's Advocate describe God again? Does he not describe him as a puppet master who says, first you can look but don't touch, then touch but don't taste, then taste but you can't swallow? And but that whole monologue is mine. This is one of his best performances, I think.
Yeah, it's a pure satanic ritual. That movie's a satanic ritual. So the thing, though, I think Israel is set up to be the sacred sacrifice, but it has to involve respinning, retooling Judaism itself to be the worst version of itself, to do the greatest wrongs possible, such that everybody in the world, all cultures.
Well, but Matt, there is a difference between the Israelites, and we were going to participate in this debate together, Benjamin, but I missed it. It was about whether the Jews are the real Jews, and there is that difference between the ancient Israelites, the Jews, and the modern day Israelis. You know, they're not mutually exclusive, are they?
No, there's a high priesthood. That goes back to Babylon.
If you could look at like the ancient Samaritans, they maintain the original canon. You know, they were not subject to the Babylonian exile, which introduced, you know, the whole Talmud and stuff like that. And so if you look at the people who are probably the direct descendants from the ancient Israelites, it's probably the Samaritans who are still maintained to be what we call today the West Bank at Mount Gerizim.
Yeah, Mount Gerizim, yeah.
Yeah. Jim, what do you think about that?
I don't buy it. I mean, as a Christian, I would point out that when Christ speaks to the Samaritan woman at the well, he says salvation is of the Jews, meaning himself, that he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And actually the Samaritans had been deported, and that's why they were sort of a mixed people, because
there was the Assyrian assault. And there was a lot of ethnic mixing. But if you look at the timeline of the Jews after the Babylonian exile, and after the Romans destroyed the temple, they were subject to so many historical migrations. So their lineage, there must have been more mixing. And I think when it comes to the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic.
But you're giving a kind of, if you will, a Jewish explanation to this. I mean, that from a Christian point of view, the fulfillment of the law and the prophets in Christ, and then the growth of the church, which is Israel, which is Israel, with the unbelieving branches cut off and the other branches grafted in. That's still the same Israel. And what the rabbinical Judaism, which is actually a reaction and rejection of the Messiah of Israel, what they do and who they mix with, and the Samaritans and so forth, that's really irrelevant. I mean, that's just toing and froing of people that have nothing to do with the fulfillment of the law of God as revealed in the Old Testament.
Yes, and as a Christian, don't you believe that the church, or I know this is part of Catholic canon, but the church is the body of Christ?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm Orthodox, so I believe the Orthodox Church is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. But I mean, I think that's a continuous tradition going back. I mean, look, if you look at the book of Acts, like many of the priests believe, I mean, that the worship of the temple became the worship of the church, but that's the true worship of the God of Israel fulfilled in Christ, not the rabbinical rejection of the Messiah, which is what modern rabbinical Judaism is.
I guess my point was about the direct descendants of the ancient Israelites. And that I would imagine, since the Samaritans are more akin to who the ancient Israelites were, in the sense that they maintain the original canon.
I don't think it's true, though. I think there were people in Israel and in Judea who were keeping the law and the prophets as the way was given to them. Look, you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, various sects. Some were more faithful than others. I don't think you could say that the Samaritans were more faithful.
I don't mean to say that they were more faithful. However, the Samaritans maintain the Torah, and there is no Talmud, there is no Zohar, there's none of that.
Well, so a lot of people in Judea did not have the Talmud either. I mean, they simply preserved the law as it was given to them.
Benjamin, you participated in that debate on the Tamal. What was your question that you asked to the two interlocutors, Israel and Captain, don't remember his name.
Tazariak.
Yeah.
That's an interesting character right there.
And after this, I'll wrap it up because I can see time's getting on. But go ahead, Benjamin. Sorry.
With Israel, my question was primarily around the inception of Israel and then the propaganda prior to the inception of Israel, where it's a very interesting thing. Before the inception of Israel, when they were trying to spread the propaganda for that, they said nation of the Hebrew people. And Hebrew was the word that they used. After the inception of Israel, they became Israeli people, in the Hebrew, which is more ethnically tied than nationally tied, but that went away, and now they're Israeli people. And I wanted to talk to him about that. And then he also explained that the original, and so this is super fascinating. So the folks that are the anti-Zionist Israelis, why that would be is because Israel are the people of Jacob. It's not tied to any land. It's tied to Jacob and the inheritance from him.
Yeah.
And so that's why they are called Israelites, because of Jacob. And that the Jews, those specifically, were the people that derived from Judea. So there's a lot of different groups that we're talking about here, and during these time periods, these groups would intermingle. So where we're looking at is a lot of different groups. Well, one of the reasons that obviously I was asking was, now when we add in the group that you were referring to, the Ashkenazi Jews or the white Jews, inside their own rituals, they have the scapegoat ritual, where they put the sins off onto this scapegoat, and it's like a trick God situation. And so this is, and the same thing is actually conspiracy theory about World War II itself and the 6 million, where these were sacrificed as wheat before the chaff, so the return of Israel, or the believing in good Jews, could have their Holy Land back. And so what this is they don't want to pay the penalty out of their numbers, so they create this scapegoat, and then the scapegoat is the one that pays the penalty, and they somehow fool God doing this.
Well,
Nico.
Yeah. There's another aspect of that. Since a lot of obviously rabbinical Judaism is a rejection of Christ the Messiah. That there have been many false messiahs through the century: Shabtai Tzvi, Yaakov Prank, and so forth. Menachem Schneerson, the Chabad rabbi, claimed to be the Messiah. But I think there's also the sense in which a lot of Jews see themselves as a people, as a Messiah people. So the Holocaust is the crucifixion, Israel is the resurrection. So it's the same kind of mythos. I'm not saying it's false, but I'm saying it's the same way of telling the story, but applied collectively to a people, as opposed to the actual Messiah who appeared as a man 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, and as you alluded to there, Benjamin, about the difference between the Ashkenazis and the Hebrews. The Hebrews were the Canaanites, and the Canaanite civilization predates the ancient Israelites by over 1,000 years. So, Nico, you've got that cross in the background. So, as a Christian, what do you think about this?
I actually don't even want to participate in that conversation. I was just enjoying Benjamin, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of my fellow Christian here.
Jim.
Yeah, 3 letters. So hard for me to remember. I was enjoying your conversation, to be honest with you, because I'm no scholar. I read my Bible, I study my Bible, but I'm no scholar, nor do I claim to be one. But I really, really enjoy listening to Jim explaining it, and Benjamin arguing, or is arguing the good term. I enjoy those type of conversation because they're not my cup of tea. I don't feel the need to explain my spirituality to others or debate it. But at the same time, I've met Christ myself, so nobody can ever tell me that I didn't. And I will never lose believing in serving others. That's how my Christianity reflects in all aspect of my life. But I just got to say, that's all I'm going to say. But I want them to continue the conversation because I don't feel I can participate to the level that they can. And I don't want to diminish this conversation either.
I'd love to just do what Jim and I have to just do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
It's a very there's so much more to it, and we will derail everything. I would love to do another show though, Jim, and have that discussion.
Matthew, before we wrap this up, is there anything you would like to say on
it? No, there's crazy people with power that believe that their job is to invoke the Book of Revelation. And when George Bush gave his little interview in 2004 about his motives for the war in Iraq, he said, Gog and Magog, it's all about bringing in Gog and Magog. And, these little things, I don't want to forget them, because it's little hints about what's tempering the beat frequency, moving us into, some people think of it as like, passing through the age of Kali Yuga, ending the age of Kali Yuga for the next millennial, 1,000-year Reich of some age of darkness, some dark enlightenment, some age of dark freedom, as some have called it in Russia, that certain followers of Crowley, for example, who have their tentacles moving in certain places. And it's something that Arthur C. Clarke, I think, was talking about as well in his, who's a knight commander of the British Empire, Arthur C. Clarke, like he's one of the Rosicrucian creatives who are invoking or creating the new oracles, the new tempering Sibylline oracles under the manifestation of what became science fiction. But I think it's a guideline, in a sense, in his Foundation series, where when Elon Musk names his kid based on the name of the leading figure in Foundation, who's assigned to choose and select what of human civilization will be preserved in the coming 1,000-year dark age. That's the name of Elon Musk's most recent kid that he birthed with a witch, a practicing witch, who took pictures of herself.
What's the kid's name?
It's let me get it. Elon Musk. Let me just Google it here. Child name, Foundation. Here we go. It is Harry Seldon. So it's Seldon. Seldon something or other. Seldon Lycurgus. That's it. Based on the Spartan Lycurgus. And Seldon from Harry Seldon.
The lawgiver. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and his other kid is, by the way, named Romulus. Which again, when you think about what his, people like, anyway, it's concerning.
What I was saying, it all goes back to Rome.
Yeah, and I don't envy whatever famous person generated a kid whose name is Remus. I don't envy that kid.
I was going to say, nobody ever names their kid Remus.
Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap this up now. So, starting with you, Matt, why don't you tell the audience where we can find you and is there anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, CanadianPatriot.org is my history geopolitical journal, and we just made a documentary called Black Sun Rising on esoteric roots of Nazism, and we actually made a book to accompany the movie, which people can get on Amazon or send me an email on the website, and it looks like that, a little picture of crazy Hitler, Black Sun over there, a little UFO that people can't really see in Blavatsky.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's a fun little sign, Photoshop. So. Yeah, that's something they could send me an email. I could tell you how to get a signed copy. So CanadianPatriot.org.
Benjamin, why don't you tell everyone where we can get your channel?
Yeah, you can find me if you're looking for the more occult type things. It's either Benjamin Balderson or Weaving Spiders Webs is where I do those things. And if you're looking for more, although I'm dragging the occult into it, more just modern, like political and things, religious philosophy debates. I do those over on the Raging Tomato. I also restream them on mine. I greatly appreciate being on the panel with you, gentlemen.
Nico, I appreciate you coming on for the first time. Why don't you tell the audience where we can find your channel and everything else?
Real Nico Lagan. I'm everywhere. I'm a social media buff, I guess you would call. I'm everywhere. So simple enough.
Okay. Jim?
The only place to find me is on Elon Musk's X and at Jim Jatras. You can also see my book here. I tried to warn you. It's you can see it's also good for home defense. Yeah, for those of you in countries where you don't have a Second Amendment. So I recommend it highly, of course.
And for the audience, if you liked, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and you can find me at the Caledon Elixir. And if you really liked, you can drop a donation at Buy Me a Coffee. So thanks for joining us, and I'll catch you later, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.